Good afternoon. My name is Cheney Bell, and I will be presenting my Child Development and Assessment Portfolio for CI 337. So this is my table of contents, and it just shows I will be presenting about the introduction of the child, physical development, social development, cognitive development, language development, my evaluation, and works cited. So let's get started. So this is Rainier. He is a 12-year-old male from Chicago, Illinois. He wanted me to input that he does cross country at his school, or was, not right now, and that he is in his school band. For physical development, the assessment that I chose to input in my presentation was child is able to use mature utensils to prepare his or her own food. So I allowed the child to pick his own favorite meal because I thought that that would help him to get a little more involved and comfortable with the assessment in a whole. And so he told me he wanted to make his favorite meal, which was grilled cheese with bacon. So it was actually worked out perfectly because the meal called for using a knife, spatula, and tongs. So it was great. So when we started doing the assessment, I instructed the child on how to prepare the meal. So as far as like the recipe, so I told him like, okay, you have to put the fire on, you have to put butter on the bread, and then put it on to the skillet. Okay, you need to flip the bread. So that was the only type of direction I gave him. And as far as the direction on the utensils, he did not receive any. That was based off his own knowledge of how he felt the utensils should be used. So after we completed the assessment, the results were that he met the criterion. The reason being was because when he used the tongs, I noticed the first time he really couldn't grasp the bacon as well as he should have been able to. So that's why I gave him meeting the criterion. Overall, he used all the materials well enough to be considered typical for his age, but I would suggest that he needs more exposure with tongs. So I used, for the recording methods, I used video screenshots and a rating scale. The rating scale was used to see could the child use the mature utensils properly to prepare his food. So this slide is, let me move my camera. This slide is showing the video screenshots I took of him using each of the utensils so you could kind of get a visual for how he did. So when he was using the knife, you can see that he kept his fingers away from where he was cutting, which was really good to see. When he was flipping his sandwich, he had the spatula on one end and had his hand on the other end to make sure it flipped without it breaking loose and getting messy, which was good. And then at the top, you see him using the tongs to put his bacon on the plate. But I did notice when he was actually cooking the bacon to flip the bacon, he did not grasp the tongs like he should have. So that's why he got meeting the criteria. My next assessment was for social development. And the item assessed was the ability to problem solve in social situations. So the child was instructed to listen to social situation problems and respond to them. These social situations, I decided were going to be based around school scenarios, something that was a little bit more that he could, compare with and really understand. And he possibly could have been through it in school himself. So for this assessment, I used a rubric and an audio with a transcript. So the audio with the transcript was used to record the child's responses to the scenarios that I gave. And the rubric was based on, could the child problem solve in the social situations? So after we completed this assessment, the child accomplished the criterion for being able to problem solve in the social situations, and the development was typical for a 12-year-old child. So this is an example of one of these scenarios I actually used. So your friend is talking to you in class, and you tell your friend to be quiet because the teacher is talking, and the teacher tells you to stop disrupting. What would you do? So this is actually a scenario that I personally have been in. I'm sure many of you may have, where you tell somebody else to be quiet, and then the teacher didn't see them talking, but they saw you talking. So now you're in trouble. And it was really interesting because the child told me, he said that he would privately go talk to the teacher and tell her that he was not the one talking, but that he was trying to tell his friend to stop talking. And I think that was a really good response to solving a problem like this. Move my camera. Okay, my third assessment was for cognitive development, and the item assessed was, when given a problem to solve, child can analyze and find the solution. So for this assessment, I wanted to take a slightly different approach, and I wanted to use a science experiment, being that the child had to analyze. So the science experiment I used was, the child was, we had 2 plants, and prior to him seeing them, I put one plant in Sprite and one plant in water. I let it sit for about 3 to 4 days, and then I showed the child, and I asked, well, he was instructed to find out why the plant that was growing in Sprite was dying. So the way that I assessed him was through an anecdotal record to show what was being seen, how was he interacting, what was he saying, and then I used a diagram to document his thinking. So everything that he said during the anecdotal record, I put that into the diagram, and that will be shown on the next slide. So based on my results, the child was able to analyze and locate the problem and solution to the given problem. His child development I consider to be excellent for a child of his age, and I will show you the diagram on the next slide. So this is the diagram, and so as you can see, we took the first plant, which was the living plant, and he told me that he noticed that the living plant was growing in water, and that it was growing longer, and it had green leaves. Then when we look at the dying plant, he told me that it was growing in Sprite, and that he noticed that the leaves were turning brown, and that the leaves were breaking off. And he further told me, which will be in my anecdotal record, was that the reason that the plant was dying was because of the carbonation in the Sprite. So I think the child did a great job at analyzing and finding the solution to this given problem. All right, move my camera one more time. My last assessment is from language development, and the item assessed was, child can read a story with ease. So he was assessed on his ability to read a passage with ease, and when I say with ease, the criterion he was assessed at was based on his pronunciation, his smoothness of reading, and his overall reading. So I used jottings and a rating scale, and I allowed him to pick his own book that was age appropriate. and then I gave him a certain passage out of the book to read to the best of his ability. I did tell him prior to, I told him to read like he normally reads. I told him to try not to read super fast because I needed to hear him, but I told him to try his best and to just read the passage. Okay, and the results were that he met the standard and he was able to read and correct his mispronunciations as he read. I also did notice that he did take some pauses when it was a word that he didn't know, like it was a word, perspired and corporation. Those were the two words I remember that he took a slight pause at, but it was not frequent. It was not frequent, but he was able to make self-corrections for his mispronunciations. So I gave him typical for a 12-year-old, but I did think that he needs a little more practice with pronunciation of words like perspired and corporation, so that he's not taking those pauses while reading. So that did affect his smoothness of reading. Okay. And this is the book. Carl Hiaasen. Hoot is the name of the book. And yes, so I completed some jottings and a rubric to help determine how the child read the story. Some of the jottings that I made was that the child had long pauses when trying to pronounce words he did not know. And he made self-corrections for his mispronunciations. So, what can I conclude about Rainier? Well, I can conclude that Rainier has some space for improvement. Many of his developmental assessments, he scored meeting the standard. I feel that with more exposure, he could have easily scored above the typical 12-year-old child for every assessment. I think that he needs to have more exposure specifically with reading, trying not to make those long pauses. I think he also needs a little more exposure with using mature utensils and, giving him more independent time to make his own meals. I think will help him to use tongs a little bit better. And I think he did well overall. And I enjoyed doing this assessment with Rainier. Being that he was older, it was a little bit easier as far as cooperation. I know that if I would have had a younger child, it may have varied. So I'm grateful for that. And he did tell me that he was so happy about learning how to make his own meal. He told me that that was his favorite assessment to do out of all of them. And he said now he's going to be making his grilled cheese with bacon all the time. I'm like, okay. That's what you want to do. Just be safe. But I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. This is my Works Cited page. So this was the book Hoot. And I used pages 86 and 87. And then this is McAfee and Leong. And all of my assessment criterions were extended from an 8-year-old assessment, because there were not any assessments for 12-year-olds. So they had to be extended. So I appreciate everybody for listening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.